A federal court challenge to Trudeau's prorogation. Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude Beyond Mystic, and welcome to today's special report. Follow along with me here today. We have quite a few things to go through together. This is a follow-up, of course, to the semi-quasi resignation from Justin Trudeau on January 6th. And I say that because he didn't actually resign. We'll get to that in just a moment. But here, as the Toronto Sun is reporting, I sort of quit, basically here, referring to Trudeau's speech here on January 6th. Now, let's hear what Trudeau had to say specifically, and let's parse his words very carefully here before we move forward. All of this to understand that in politics, words are very important, and the choice of words more specifically. So let's listen to what he has to say. Hold on a second here. We just lost the queue. Let me try to refresh this for you guys.
Over the holidays,
there you go.
I've also had a chance to reflect and have had long talks with my family about our future. Throughout the course of my career, any success I have personally achieved has been because of their support and with their encouragement. So last night over dinner, I told my kids about the decision that I'm sharing with you today. I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process.
So you heard it from him there. He said, I intend to resign. That is not, I am resigning or I have resigned as of this particular date, right? He says after the leadership race, for which we don't have yet the details on how that is going to unfold. So we are very much still in limbo as to whether or not he is or will be resigning. Now, I thought this National Post article by Tasha Kiridan was very interesting. She says Justin Trudeau goes out, of course, blaming and betraying Canadians one more time. Trudeau didn't really take responsibility here for his actions, for his government. Instead, he seems to be blaming the backbenchers and the MPs who are no longer supporting him within his own party. So really surreal situation here for Canada nonetheless. Now, this leads us into another National Post article here by Christopher Dummett, where he was suggesting that the Governor General was betraying Constitution here by letting Trudeau and his Liberals escape Parliament, escape a non-confidence vote. This is the crux of the article here for today and why we're doing this special report. Now, what was interesting, just before the resignation, if you haven't seen this interview, I recommend you go check it out. It was with Jordan Peterson, of course, and Mr. Pierre Poilievre. Now, in this particular interview, Pierre has an opinion as to whether or not we should have a leadership race or an election right away. And he explains why the urgency. So let's play that clip here from Mr. Poilievre.
By the way, the Liberal media is all saying, well, surely you wouldn't want to trigger an election during the Liberal leadership race. Excuse me, the Canadian people are not obliged, 41 million people are not obliged to wait around while this party sorts out its... Like, these guys could have got rid of Trudeau a year and a half ago. They knew he was a disaster then. And now they say, well, we're low in the polls, so we have to get rid of him. Now, you didn't care when he was just depriving single mothers of food for their kids or doubling housing costs or unleashing crime in neighborhoods across the country. But now you're really concerned about getting rid of him because your poll numbers are down and you want to keep your job. Sorry, that's not a good reason to paralyze the entire country, in the face, by the way, of a major negotiation with the incoming U.S. president.
We'll get back to that part in just a moment here, but he makes a good point. We shouldn't have to wait here. There are threats to Canada, to our democracy, to our sovereignty, very much at the front door. And right now we have a paralyzed government. On that note, let's hear with what Michelle Rempel had to say on that subject matter.
As of now, if you're watching this and you're Canadian, you do not have a functioning parliament. Justin Trudeau went to the Governor General and did something called prorogue Parliament. Parliament will not sit in the middle of this crisis until the end of March. That's months from now. So I'm going to break down why this is so bad. But just to be perfectly clear, Justin Trudeau has not triggered an election. There's not an election right now. He shut down Parliament, which means there won't be a confidence vote. And he's trying to stay on as Liberal leader even though he's asking the Liberal Party to replace him. Again, I've got links to all of this and what this.
So she's making some very good points here, and that leads again to the Governor General and whether or not she's making a correct decision to give Trudeau reason to prorogue the House. Now, she did give him permission to prorogue the House until March of 2024, and that is the question at hand right now, whether or not that is appropriate or whether or not that is even constitutional. Now, let's hear also, interestingly enough, what some of our political pundits were saying on the mainstream news about this decision.
So how does he leave the Liberal Party now, Chantal, as it gets ready to choose a new leader and inevitably, and we'll talk about an election in the next block, but how does he leave the party?
I mean, I've watched prime ministers resign late in the game before, but in this particular case and in these circumstances, Justin Trudeau is leaving his party for sure, his caucus for sure, but also the country in a bad place. And I'm not saying that because Liberal policies. I'm saying that because on January 20th, Donald Trump is going to become president. And we will be in the middle of turmoil, Parliament not sitting, leadership campaign, which is probably the worst possible time. And there is no reference point for how bad this could be. But it is bad to have waited so long and then to leave this to a process still undefined until at least the end of March, possibly with an election, which basically means we would spend the next 6 months in some political uncertainty. That is leaving the country in a bad place.
But I mean, what was the other option, Andrew? I mean, if he had to leave or call an election, I guess the other option was he should have left sooner. Is that the only thing that would have saved him?
Let's leave that to one side. Let's say he was justified in hanging on this long. He did not have to prorogue Parliament for close to 3 months. He did not have to. The party does not have to have a 2 or 3 month long leadership race. He does not have to stay on. It's an option, but he did all these things at the same time. So to take up Chantal's point, for 3 months, we're not going to have, or close to 3 months, we're not going to have a functioning Parliament. It'll be shut down. We will not have, from this day forward, an effective prime minister. I mean, he will find he has very little leverage at this point. We are not going to have a government that is legitimate in the sense that everybody knows that it's under the gun of a confidence vote. The only reason it's prorogued is so that they can avoid that. So you've got the government essentially hiding from Parliament. You're going to have ministers of the crown, rather than attending to the country's business, will be running around the country slagging each other off and trying to destroy each other when they should be fighting Donald Trump. So at a very moment when we are under attack, under economic attack, and by a guy who plainly wishes us ill, it's not just the tariffs, it's also, the fallout from the mass deportations. There's the NATO business. There's whatever the hell he means by the 51st state thing that he keeps coming back to. So to pick this moment of all time to, as Chantal says, basically until June, we are not going to have an effective prime minister. We're not going to have a government that has the support of Parliament, and we're not going to have a Parliament really for more than a few days.
So those are all very good points, and we'll get back to the threat of Donald Trump here. Not just us becoming the 51st state, but what he's intending to do here with the Panama Canal, renaming the Gulf of Mexico, and also Greenland, and how all that ties in here to perhaps a strategic union for North America. All of that while Canada's in disarray, political disarray, with no functioning government. So all great points there. Now, let's listen also to what Danielle Smith had to say, again, in an interview here with Rosemary Barnum.
From a couple of premiers, what is your sense of the day, given this decision by the Prime Minister?
I would have liked to have seen him call an election, frankly. I think the real problem that we have right now is that we're facing a U.S. president that has a 4-year mandate, and we need a prime minister that has a 4-year mandate so that we have that strong voice at the table in negotiations. I share Premier Doug Ford's concerns that this has got to be the singular obsession of the federal government until the inauguration and after, once we see exactly what those tariffs look like for us. But the Liberals have been distracted. They're going to continue to be distracted. And for heaven's sakes, it looks like we might not even have that certainty until as late as May. So this isn't the optimal outcome. I would have far preferred to have seen the Prime Minister announce an election today.
I'm not sure an election.
So a lot of calls for the election, although the only one who's not agreeing with that is Rosemary Barton for some reason. Let's move forward here on the deck. So what happened just yesterday on January 7th was the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms here in Canada putting forward in front of the federal court here a motion or a challenge to this prorogation here. And I think that's very indicative of the situation and how dire things are in Canada. I wanted to bring this up because I'm asking now Mr. Poliver and Michelle Rempel, who all agreed we should have an election, and they were all doing the rounds here in the last couple of days, suggesting that Canadians should write to their MPs and to the Governor General to do the right thing here and to call an election. Now, if we go to this Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom, this lawyer here is explaining why proroguing Parliament right now could in fact be null and void. And he's referring to some jurisprudence from the UK government, who in 2019 ruled against Boris Johnson's prorogation. And you have to understand that we are under the same Westminster rules here in Canada. So he's making a good point there. Now, this is the article you guys are looking for. If you want to go read that, that's from The Guardian. In 5 years ago, 2019, Johnson's suspension of Parliament was unlawful, ruled by the Supreme Court here. So very interesting article to read. Now, let's hear what this constitutional lawyer, James Manson, has to say on the subject matter and why he's presenting this motion now to the federal court here in Canada.
Political trouble. That's really what it comes down to in this case. Our case is remarkably similar. That's how, anyway, we will argue the point, to the case in 2019 when Prime Minister Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom, he attempted to prorogue Parliament for 5 weeks out of 8. And the timing was very, very tricky because, as you guys may recall, that was when the Brexit was coming and they needed to have an agreement with the European Union about how to exit from the EU. And if they didn't, there could be a hard exit, and it would have been very catastrophic economically, politically for the UK and maybe for the EU. So anyway, Prime Minister Johnson at the time decided anyway to prorogue Parliament for 5 weeks of the 8 remaining weeks leading up to the Brexit. And essentially, he wanted to avoid scrutiny from Parliament. He wanted to avoid the tough questions, avoid all of the mess in the House of Commons that was happening at the time. And so ultimately, this led to a challenge like the one that we've brought today. And the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom ruled unanimously, 11 to 0, that the exercise of the prorogation power by Prime Minister Johnson to advise, at that point, the Queen, to prorogue was unlawful.
So those are very important points here, and they relate to a very similar situation here now in Canada. So if you're interested in getting more information about that, you can go to the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom's website here. The links are in the description box below. And if you scroll down there, you can actually read and download the actual application here to the federal court. So this is going to be very important here in the next couple of days to see where we plot the direction here for Canada as we are facing these both internal and external threats here to our security and to our constitution. Now, speaking of those threats, so I mentioned this at the beginning of the show, but let's break it down a little bit more here. So Trump, on one hand here, he's wanting to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. He's also announced that he wanted to retake control of the Panama Canal. Now, on top of that, he's putting pressure now on Denmark also through economic sanctions. He says placing massive tariffs on Denmark if they don't immediately relinquish the control of Greenland. So adding insult to injury to all of that, he's also now suggesting that he's going to put quote unquote economic force to acquire Canada as a state. So let's listen very carefully here to his choice words. He's being asked here about Pierre Poilievre's objection to becoming the 51st state. And let's see here what Trump's response is to all of this.
If we were to work under the assumption that you're serious about making Canada the 51st state of the United States, the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada said, under no circumstance will it ever be the 51st state.
Maybe he won't win, but maybe he will. I don't.
You had suggested.
Listen, I don't care what he says.
Sir Lopez, you said you were considering military force to acquire Panama in Greenland, are you also considering military force to annex and acquire Canada?
No, economic force, because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line and you take a look at what that looks like. And it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada.
So that's interesting there. One, he says he doesn't really care what Pierre Poilievre says. He may or may not win. That was his quote there. And he's saying that this is a strategic endeavor on his part. And he's been explaining this in the last couple of days. If you go follow him on Truth Social and on his Twitter, whether you agree with it or not, the world seems to be changing very rapidly. And there seems to be a concerted effort here for Trump to be making this North American coalition. Now, if you remember on December 23rd, Eric Trump posted this on his Twitter, and this is Trump presumably looking at Amazon here to purchase Canada, Greenland, and Panama on his cell phone there. So you can see the picture. They don't seem to be joking, and this is what the political pundits in Canada here are worried about. There's something behind all of this move, and again, we need a functioning government if we are going to face this threat and negotiate perhaps where all of this is coming from. Now, presumably, Trump is trying to create this coalition here in North America to defend against the powerhouse that is becoming the BRICS nation. All of these countries stepping out or de-dollarizing right now are creating this perhaps existential threat here to North America and to the US dollar to some extent. So all of this is happening in the background. And so far, the mainstream news here in Canada aren't really connecting the dots for all of us. So it's important to put that into perspective. Now, I thought this was interesting on Shadow of Ezra here on Twitter too. Published in Philadelphia in 1942 was this map here that was outlining the post-war New World map. And this was a proposed reorganization of the world following the Allied victories against Nazism. Now you can see that Greenland, Mexico, Canada, United States, all together here in a blue section. So this has been brought up before in strategic thinking since World War II. So it's not new that Trump is bringing up this now, and we need to have an adult conversation about what this means and why we're seeing this brought up again here for Canadians. Now, interestingly enough, Kevin O'Leary is out there suggesting that he's going to spearhead these conversations with Donald Trump to create this quote-unquote economic union between Canada and the United States. And that's all very good and dandy, Mr. O'Leary, but you're not elected and you don't have a mandate yet from the Canadian people. So I appreciate that you're there as a stopgap to Mr. Trudeau's irresponsible leadership and prorogation. But to the point here, we need a functioning government. And I think this is where we have to go back to this motion that is being presented before the federal court to look at how serious the situation is right now and whether or not the precedents of the Boris Johnson presidency or prime ministership decision to prorogue the House in the UK translate to perhaps revisiting the decision of our Governor General here in Canada. So a lot of things there to take into consideration. And on a quick note too, again with Kevin O'Leary, is revealing here that he's working on a deal to purchase TikTok to prevent its ban in the US. That's interesting too, given Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter. We're going to follow this guy very carefully here moving forward. But put that on your radar. There's going to be more stories about this coming out here very soon. Now, I was interested in Viva Frey's opinion on this. He posted an article in a YouTube video yesterday, his thoughts about the Justin Trudeau resignation. And honestly, Viva, I think you're missing part of the point here in terms of the constitutionality of the decision here to prorogue the House in Canada. I'd very much like to have you on the show to have this conversation with you and to perhaps explore a little bit deeper this motion that is being presented now here and this challenge before the federal court. You can reach me on my Twitter and you have my email address also. Now, when I was a student here at Pavillon Fauteux at the Common Law faculty in Ottawa, I was studying under Gérald Baudouin. He was at the time one of the renowned constitutional experts here in Canada. He's since passed away. But what was interesting in those classes was that a big part of the curriculum at the time was to debate the use of the War Measures Act by then Prime Minister Trudeau. Sr. This was, of course, in reaction to the October crisis in 1970, where the Front de Libération du Québec had kidnapped some politicians. And this led to the invocation here of the War Measures Act by Trudeau Sr. And at that time, and there's been, of course, much ink that's been spilled on this very story, whether or not this was Trudeau's darkest hour. This brings us into full circle here to Justin Trudeau and his invocation of the Emergencies Act during the Freedom Convoy here in Ottawa. Here, Rex Murphy on the National Post was suggesting that Trudeau's national emergency was a pure concoction of political convenience. So that's also a threat here, I believe, and in my opinion, I would suggest the lawyers who are presenting this motion now before the federal court include this as a threat. It's not just the United States government incoming president here with Donald Trump threatening our borders, but it's also perhaps the threat of another Emergencies Act being invoked here in Canada to presumably prolong Trudeau's reign of power here. As I said, and as he said, he has not yet resigned. And so he may resort to using these types of measures to prolong the stalemate situation that we have here in Canada. That's something else. I'd love to have Viva Frey's opinion on that. And again, Viva, if you want to come on the show, please email me and we'll have this conversation. Now, moving forward to that here too. So there's another threat that should be added. Prime Minister Trudeau announced that he had asked the president of the Liberal Party to start the leadership race here. Now, after his supposed resignation and prorogation of the House, the rules for this leadership race have not yet been established, and I believe they have a caucus meeting tomorrow and maybe Thursday to determine some of those rules. But this brings us to another threat also. We still do not know the names of the people who are supposedly involved in foreign interference. The RCMP has those names. We've been asking the government to release those names. And presumably here, if there is an internal leadership race in the Liberal Party, there may still be foreign interference. And so if we're going to choose a new leader of the Liberal Party, wouldn't it be important to perhaps have another election now to have a change of leadership to go after some of this foreign interference so that we can in fact deal with it moving forward in Canada? So this is another very big threat to our Canadian democracy, adding to this federal court challenge here that was brought yesterday on January 7. Let's hear what Michelle Rempel again has to say about why we need an election now.
This is why it is so critical, regardless of how people vote. If they care about this country and our democracies, that people are loudly asking for a general election. That's what we need to do right now. So as Derek said at the front end of this segment, that we're not taking months and months and months and months, or as you're suggesting, over a year to get to a point where, there's a government with an actual mandate. That needs to happen as soon as possible.
And she goes on to ask Canadians there to write to their MPs, to write to the Governor General, to revisit this decision of prorogation. And so I'm inviting both Michelle Rempel and Pierre Poilievre and the MPs to come in also on this motion. So far, they are not participants to this action that's been brought in front of the federal court, and I've not heard them at the time of this recording here. I'm now recording live at 12:30 Eastern on Wednesday, January 8th, whether or not they would support this action here. So very interesting moving forward. And I think it's not just the people in power right now, but also perhaps candidates across Canada right now who are vying and who are working for their constituents moving forward here in this upcoming election. And I'm thinking of the leadership of Pierre Lemieux. He's a lieutenant colonel, retired of the military. He ran under the Stephen Harper banner, who was elected, and I believe he's running again here. So I'm asking people like this also to come to bear and bring this attention, not just to their constituents, but to the Governor General and also to this action that is being brought forward here to the federal court. So I'm hoping that these people, on top of Canadians, are going to come together here to try to get this situation, this dire situation here, as Chantal Hébert was saying, in Canada, resolved sooner than later. So, Mr. Polyev, please. Yes, absolutely. We're looking for your leadership here, and you're saying that you're going to bring Canada back to its values, and we're very much hoping that we can go back to those Canadian values. And I hope that you're also going to support this action here in front of the federal court. Now, we'll be coming back later this afternoon. I have an interview with Andy Sheckman at 2 p.m. Eastern. This is the Beyond the Vault series, where we typically look at the markets and the impacts, political impacts here on the dollar, on gold, silver, and some cryptos. We are going to be discussing here today this prorogation too, and this move by Donald J. Trump here to create this North American strategic union of sort, and what that does to our monetary policy moving forward. So if you don't want to miss that, please join me at 2 p.m. Eastern today, and I'll be back this evening as well for the Beyond the News edition of the Breaking News. That's going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern here on beyondmystic.net. We're going to get into this also in more detail, and we're going to be asking Janine here to provide some clarity of perhaps what's happening in the background of all of this. So if you don't want to miss a beat, please check out the schedule here at beyondmystic.net. And yeah, it's one hell of a day in Canadian politics. So follow me, guys, here on Twitter and on Rumble for more of these special reports. I'm Jacques-Claude at Beyond Mystic. I love you guys. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Au revoir.